Hello, Packers fans. It's time for your Pack Attack Cast for August 27th, waiver day in the NFL. So, we've got a lot of news and notes surrounding waivers and the practice squad today. And then I want to revisit our continuous spreadsheet on depth and who's going to be available for week one. I think week one is going to be a critical trendsetter for the Green Bay Packers this year. So it's not just, is there an injury? It's, is there an injury that's going to impact week one? And I think we got some great news and notes today, in particular from Matt LaFleur. We got some cryptic injury updates. So want to go through some of those. I'm going to go through those as we go through our spreadsheet. I'm going to give you the information we got from Matt LaFleur in his press conference today, which just ended about 20 minutes ago. We've got plenty of interesting players that were added to the practice squad that I want to talk about. Some new names and some old names, which I think is a good thing for the Green Bay Packers. And before we get to that, I want to help that if you haven't already done so, please give us a subscribe. We're just under 8,600 subs for the first 4 months of this channel. If we could get to 9,000 before the snap of week one, I will be ecstatic. I will be there for Packers v. Lions. Hope to see you all there. Very excited about that game, but I'd be more excited if we could get to 9,000 subs before the kickoff of that game. We got about 400 subs to go, so I think we can definitely shatter that target with your help. Also, give us a like if you enjoyed this video. So we've got a lot of things to get through today. We've got news and notes from Matt LaFleur, but I'm also going to tie them into a review of our running spreadsheet of the roster. So let's go ahead and share our roster spreadsheet here. For those of you that haven't seen this before, we're editing live here, as they like to say. We're doing it live. So we've got our position development compared to last year, if it applies, any injury issues that we know about, and most importantly, the status for week one. So we're going to run through these, and we're also going to go through, as part of it, we have our practice squad signings as of this afternoon at 3:30 Green Bay time. Obviously, we'll be updating this continuously. This is my living and breathing spreadsheet for the Packers roster. So, of course, at quarterback, we have Jordan Love and Malik Willis. We have an update from Matt LaFleur today in his press conference. He said he's having a ramp-up week this week before they really get fully into practice next week before they play the Detroit Lions. And he said one of the focuses for the last two practices, there was a practice yesterday, there's a practice today, is to get Jordan Love as many snaps as possible for week one. So there's no question he's not going to be ready for week one, and they're working on getting him comfortable, I assume, with using his left thumb that had surgery to get back into the flow of the game, taking snaps under center, doing handoffs with the running backs, doing things with that left hand, and getting back into where he normally would be for a week one game. So really good to hear that Jordan Love is getting a priority of snaps. That's the impression I took. So generally speaking, you see the quarterbacks split snaps. It's going to be even more the case now because we no longer have Sean Clifford and El Gersma in Packers uniforms as of yesterday. So that means in camp, in practice, I should say, camp is over. In practice, they had Jordan Love and they had Malik Willis. So it's already going to be a 50-50 split, which should be sufficient to give Jordan Love the reps he needs. And they're probably splitting it up pretty evenly between the two players, 50-50, because they don't want Jordan Love to overuse that thumb ligament. They want to make sure it gets sufficient rest. So that would be my case. In the quarterback room, we have a surprise signing to the practice squad of Toon, who it was a 5th-round pick of the Cardinals. He hasn't seen a lot of action, but he was highly regarded by the Cardinals, and there was a number of other teams in his draft class that were interested in him. And interestingly enough, he did play at Houston, and if I'm not mistaken, he and Matthew Golden overlapped as far as their tenure at Houston. So that's kind of an interesting twist. I don't think the fact that he played at Houston was material, but I think it's interesting that Toon is going to have a relationship with Matthew Golden already, since they played on the field together in Houston. So Toon was a 5th-round pick by the Cardinals. He was released yesterday. Let's step back a second. So there were waiver wire transactions yesterday. The Packers didn't have any players claimed off of waivers, which kind of surprised me. And the Packers didn't make any waiver claims. So Toon is being signed as a free agent to the practice squad. Now, for Toon, it makes a lot of sense because he knows likely Malik Willis is going to move on next year, hopefully to an opportunity to compete for a starting job. So Toon has the opportunity to work with the coaching staff for a year on the practice squad and hopefully compete for that number 2 job next year on the active roster. So for Toon, I think this is a really good situation. Now, Brian Gutekunst talked about the fact that Clifford and El Gersma were not added. He did not talk about Toon in his press conference today. But for those 2 players, he had comments. So basically, they felt El Gersma was too raw to keep onto the practice squad. And Sean Clifford, he basically said, we kind of seen all that we've seen from Sean. We think it's good for everybody to have a fresh start, and maybe Clifford can have some success elsewhere, but the Packers didn't feel that he was what they needed. He basically said they need a player who has upside and might be more developed than El Gersma. So Toon really fits in that. He's had a couple years of NFL development on the Cardinals, and he was a former 5th-round pick. So we're adding a former 5th-round pick as our third quarterback on the practice squad. That's a win-win for me. Rumors I had was that several teams were interested in Toon, so it looks like Matt LaFleur and Gutekunst had a good pitch to him, probably combined with a decent salary, to say, hey, we need a backup quarterback of the future. How would you like to come to Green Bay? So I think that's a great situation for everybody. So let's look at our running backs here. The big update we have from when we looked at this last week, Marshawn Lloyd is now on the IR, designated to return. He will be back. He will miss the first 4 weeks. The Packers have a bye week, week 5, so I expect him to be back into the mix week 6. So in effect, that bye week actually comes in really good time because that gives them 2 weeks to get Marshawn Lloyd practicing with the ones and building up that ramp up to being available on game day. So I think that early bye worked out really well for Marshawn Lloyd. And the biggest news for today, in addition to Marshawn Lloyd, is Anabakanda. I got to learn to pronounce that name now. He's officially on the practice squad. He's expected to be good for week 1, of course. And he's eligible for a call-up. I think this is interesting. He did a little punt return, kick returning, and we're going to talk about another punt returner and kick returner who's back on the roster on the practice squad, which is a big surprise for me in a little bit. But I think this player showed enough that he is a great practice squad stash. And if he was elevated, maybe let's say Eric Wilson aggravates his knee injury week 1 and they need a player for week 2, then he could be elevated as that third running back. Incidentally here, I did update this, so I believe Josh Jacobs for week 1 will get 85 to 90% of the snaps for week 1 against Detroit. He's going to be coming off a couple weeks of practice. He should be well rested. It's the first game of the season, and it's a divisional opponent. So I expect Josh Jacobs to be out there a ton. And could he have given away maybe 5 or 10% of his snaps to Marshawn Lloyd if he was healthy? Probably. But since that's not going to happen, I think Josh Jacobs is going to be out there a ton week 1. So let's look at our wide receivers. The biggest question mark for me continues to be Josh Reed with his strained foot. What I really want to see, and I didn't get this in the press conference today, is that Jayden Reed is practicing with the first team offense. That is the sentence I want to hear. Jayden Reed practicing with the first team offense. If that happens next week, I think that Jayden Reed will be fine as your slot wide receiver for week 1. And that would be a huge sense of relief. Donatavian Wicks still has a calf strain, but I still believe a calf strain tells me that if it was a game, they would find a way to numb it up, warm it up, whatever they need to do with the training staff to get him ready for week 1, because he's now their 4th wide receiver. And in the event Jayden Reed wouldn't play, then I would actually expect him obviously to take the spot of one of the top 3. And more likely than not, I think you'd end up seeing Matthew Golden in the slot when needed, and you'd have Wicks on the outside, because Wicks is very much an outside speed receiver, and Matthew Golden is very effective and efficient in the slot. So I think that's how that would play out. But I'm still hoping that Jayden Reed will be good to go for week 1. So I have it as expected to be good, but it's in red with a question mark. So again, I'd love to see something from a reporter or from Matt LaFleur saying Jayden Reed is practicing with the first team. That's all I want to know, and then I feel very confident he'll be ready for week 1. Of course, we have Christian Watson on the PUP. He'll also be possibly able to come back week 6 due to the timing of the bye week. So that's great news. And then on the practice squad for wide receiver, we had Will Shepherd return. That was something I actually predicted. He's going on to the practice squad. We have Nair, also predicted he would come back. He is expected to be good on the practice squad for week 1. And Mecole Hardman, in a surprising signing to me, came to the practice squad for the Packers. That tells me a couple things. Number one, as of the time the Packers made the offer, no team came to him and said, we would like you on our active roster. So then he had to decide practice squad with a team that I don't know or practice squad with the Packers, and he ended up going with the Packers. Now, interestingly enough, even if he's called up to the active roster on week 1, his contract is not guaranteed for the whole season as a vested veteran if he's coming up from the practice squad. So do I think he plays week 1? I think there's a pretty good chance that Hardman is your punt returner and kick returner for week 1. The reason I say that is it's week 1 against the Lions, and although Hardman struggled, in my opinion, in the preseason games, he's still a very sure catcher of the ball, and he is effective when he has the ball in his hands. And my biggest concern week one is a situation where turnovers decide the game. And Hardman is a nice, safe choice to activate and elevate for game day and take your punt return and kick returns and feel that he's not likely to cause a turnover near your own end zone. I know he had one in the preseason, but historically Hardman has been very good with his hands and avoids drops. So I feel like this is a smart move for the Packers, and I do expect him to be elevated for week one. We'll see as we get closer to the game. Now, for example, going back to Jaden Reed, let's say Jaden Reed is out for week one. Then I think it's even more likely that Hardman will be activated for week one to give them wide receiver depth. So we'll see what happens there. All right, let's look at our offensive line. We have some good news regarding week one. Okay. So we have updates on two players that I heard in the conference. If there was somebody else, let me know. Matt LaFleur was asked several times about injuries in the press conference, and he was generally very coy about some of the players, and we're going to talk about some of those later. But he did mention that Banks specifically and Walker were practicing the last 2 days. This is big news. Walker has been consistent with his groin injury, and I'm about ready to put non-applicable here because he's been playing and practicing pretty consistently. So, in fact, let's just do that right now. We're going to do that right now. For Quay Walker, we're doing this live. I'm going to change this to NA. This matters only to me. Of course, you guys are like, why is he doing this? But just thinking ahead, I've seen enough from Rasheed Walker to believe that he'll be ready for week one. But specifically, Matt LaFleur was asked about Aaron Banks in the press conference, and he said that a back injury is always troubling because it can always come back. But then, he said Aaron Banks has been practicing yesterday and today. So that tells me he's practicing with the first team offense and that he will be ready for week one. So that's my assumption right now from what we heard from Matt LaFleur. So I'm excited to hear that. Of course, we have Jacob Monk, who is now missing the first 4 weeks of the season and will return probably week 6. He's a depth player. We have Kennard, who was added via trade last week, or on Sunday actually. He is expected to be good, and he is part of our active roster. We have Glover, who is on IR out for the season, but then we have 2 practice squad additions. We have Banks and Cooper, both added to the practice squad to have depth. So we now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 offensive linemen that are available for call-up for week one, including the practice squad. But it's great to hear that Banks is going to be available for week one. That's my assumption. I still think Rasheed Walker is your starter at left tackle. That's my assumption. And then I would expect Jordan Morgan to be sprinkled in with snaps at tackle and guard week one, just to get him some game reps and to see how he performs. So when Rasheed Walker especially needs a break, they're going to put Jordan Morgan into his spot because they're still kind of competing for that role next year. Now, I've talked about this in other videos. I think that there's a couple roster competitions that will be decided during the bye week, week 5. Rasheed Walker and Jordan Morgan, I think, are in a quiet competition for the starting role between now and week 5 on the bye week. Because the bye week is the ideal time to make a change at a starting position. So don't be surprised if Jordan Morgan is looking good in limited snaps. We might see Jordan Morgan become the starting left tackle as early as week 6. So we're going to watch that very closely. Banks and Cooper are certainly good depth pieces right now. And as far as our offensive line, and I really want to point this out, it is one of the strengths of this team. Okay? Let's take a quick look. It's a bit of a tangent, but it's important to me. Rasheed Walker would be a starter on most NFL teams. Aaron Banks would be a starter on most teams. Elton Jenkins at center would absolutely be a starter on probably 27 out of 32 teams. Sean Ryan is a quality starter. He would be a starter on most teams. And Zach Tom, without a doubt, would be a starter on almost every NFL team at right tackle. Jordan Morgan, in my opinion, is a player that is worthy of being a starter on many other NFL teams. Anthony Belton, he's had his problems, but there are some teams that, like the Lions, look at their offensive line in the center. Anthony Belton is better than 3 starters on the Lions, in my opinion. He's better than their center. He's better than both their guards. I would take Anthony Belton over all 3 of those players for the Lions. So don't look at this roster and underestimate the value of this depth. There are going to be injuries, and the Packers are well built to address them on the offensive line, especially. Monk will be back in probably week 6, and then I think the Packers are going to have to decide between Monk, Jennings, and Kennard. They're going to have to drop one of those 3 players. So we're going to watch that very closely. Again, during the bye week, week 5, it's going to be a very exciting time to try to get some news. All right, so let's look at the defensive line now. I'm only going to go through updates here. So, Baron Sorrell was the big surprise. He was left on the active roster, even though he has a knee injury. That makes me feel that by week 2 at the latest, he's going to be available. Otherwise, they probably would have used his slot for another player. So Sorrell, I expect to be back as late as week 2, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if we see week 1. This is another player I'm just looking for in a press conference to say, oh yeah, Sorrell is practicing with the second team defense right now, or something like that. He's getting regular reps in practice. Those are the things that I want to hear from the press conferences, because it's going to be harder and harder to get injury information, especially from these players deeper in the roster. Do I think in the press conference next week someone's going to say, what's going on with Jaden Reed? 100%. Are they as likely to say, hey, do we have an update on Brandon Sorrell? Not as likely. So we're going to have to try to get through the tea leaves to figure out if Sorrell is practicing or not. Okay, and we've got 3 additions to the practice squad on defensive line. Esther, Alexander, and I'm very excited to see Mosby back on the practice squad. Mosby is an experienced player they can activate on game day, and I can feel very confident he will give you quality reps on the defensive line. So very excited to see that. Let's look at linebacker. We have some developments here. Nothing on the injury front for our starters. Tyron Hopper was specifically brought up in the press conference today to Matt LaFleur, and they said, is he pressing for more reps and possibly a starting job. And Matt LaFleur said, he's got to keep doing what he's doing. So that's coach speak for saying he's doing really well. And if he keeps doing as well, then maybe he will be a starter. Because Tyron Hopper, in my opinion, and we're going to edit this online again. In my opinion, he gets 2 up arrows for his development this year. A lot of people at the start of training camp thought maybe he was a busted pick. He's never going to be an impact player, but he has looked great in practice and in the preseason. He was a thumper in the preseason for sure. So that tells me that he and McDuffie are in a quiet competition. Again, a quiet competition to be a starter on first and second down. So we're going to have to see what happens there. Okay, we had some signings here. Nyman, who was a linebacker for the Chargers, was signed to the active roster as a depth player at linebacker. So he's going to be good. He's not going to be on the practice squad. Initial reports were that he was going to be on the practice squad, but no, he's actually going to be on the active roster. Very exciting for me, not only because I predicted he would be on the roster in some form, but Christian Welch is back on the practice squad. That is great to see. I think he's got a ton of potential. He played meaningful snaps on the active roster for the Ravens, I think, last year. So the fact that we have a player with active snaps under his belt and is a great special teams player on the practice squad, love to see it. Very excited about that. So let's look at our cornerbacks now. So Nate Hobbs specifically came up in the press conference today. So I want to talk about that. Matt LaFleur was asked about an update on Nate Hobbs. Will he be ready for week 1? Matt LaFleur's answer was, hope so. I hope so. So he kind of said it with a smile and a grin, and that what that tells me is Nate Hobbs is going to be ready for week 1, and Matt LaFleur just doesn't want to let the Lions know what's going on with the cornerback room before he has to. So I expect Nate Hobbs to be fine. Again, we want to hear at some point next week, Nate Hobbs made a play in practice. Nate Hobbs is participating in practice. These are the things we want to see. But I think Nate Hobbs is looking good for week 1. And you could take that hope so from LaFleur to be negative. I take it as positive. I think he's just playing a little cat and mouse with the Lions. Okay, on the practice squad, we have some additions. Baldwin, who I thought would end up on the practice squad, did in fact end up on the practice squad. And Simpson was also added to the practice squad. So additional depth at cornerback is really important for this team, especially until Nate Hobbs is good to go. We are just a couple injury updates away from being all systems go for week 1. You have to remember the Lions are missing some people they would normally start already. We know, for example, McNeil is not going to play week 1. He's not going to play until November. So the Lions have injury issues already. What the Packers have are possible injury issues. I would much rather be in the Packers side with possible injury issues than definite players that are going to miss week 1. So we are looking really good for week 1. The Packers know week 1 is a hugely important game. It sends a message to the team that they're good enough to beat the team that won the division last year. Sends a message to the NFC North that the Packers are going to be competing for the division this year. Sends a message to people who doubt the Packers because of how they've struggled against the Eagles in the playoffs last year. Just even though there's a whole bunch of injuries, but we'll leave that as it may. There is a huge impact psychologically to your team if week 1 you can beat the Lions at home and you can take a lead in the NFC North. We know the Vikings and the Bears are going to be playing on Monday Night Football. Wouldn't it be nice to see the Packers up on top of that list, followed by the Vikings and Bears, and maybe the Lions way down on the bottom? That would be huge. So hopefully that will come to pass. All right, let's look at safeties. We have updates here. Zane Anderson made it to the active roster. He still has a knee injury. We haven't seen him play in a preseason game. So I'm hoping he will be good. We're going to probably learn in the next couple days because he might be put on IR designated to return or something like that. But I'm expecting he will be good for week 1, but I haven't seen enough to confirm that. Omar Brown was put on the IR yesterday. He will miss 2025 with his lung injury, but the Packers will retain his rights going into 2026. So I'm happy to see that. Also happy to see, on a personal note, that Omar Brown is going to be receiving a paycheck. He doesn't have to worry about his finances while he recovers from a serious lung injury. I think the Packers did this because they like Omar Brown and his future potential, but it's also a very classy thing for the Packers to say, you're going to get a paycheck every month, just get better, and we'll see you next year. So I'm sure that's what the message was from Matt LaFleur. Then finally on special teams, we have McNamee. He was added to the practice squad as an international player. He will be good. He's going to be our backup kicker. Can be called up to the active roster if, like, let's say McManus pulls a hamstring in warm-ups or something crazy like that. Maybe McManus wakes up with the flu. Then they will have him available. If McNamee gets meaningful snaps at kicker for the Packers, I will be very concerned. He did not play well in the second preseason game. Hopefully, with weeks and weeks and weeks of practice, McNamee will improve. But we don't want to see him on the we don't want to see any of these practice squad players, for that matter. I don't want to see Tooney on the field. I don't want to see Abanikanda on the field. I think I said it right that time. I think you just have to say it quickly. Abanikanda. If you try to do it too slow, I think it fucks you up. Language, as Steve Rogers would say. So, very excited about who we got on the practice squad. Excited that we have linebacker depth. Excited that we're getting some injury updates for week 1. I think things are trending in the right direction for the Green Bay Packers for week 1. Very excited about it. We're going to continue to talk about it. We're probably going to have an update on transactions tomorrow. I want to look at transactions for the Packers, see if there's any updates to this. Also, any updates from practice about players' health. And also, I want to look at the rest of the NFC and look at some of the roster moves they made and how that will impact your Packers. Then I'm going to do some questions from the audience. So, as always, you can email me at packattackcast@gmail.com. packattackcast@gmail.com. If you have questions that you would like me to discuss on Friday, send them in now and Thursday. And on Friday, I will do a questions and answers segment for our video. And your question might end up on the stream. So send me a question at packattackcast.gmail.com, and we will answer your questions on Friday. And we're probably going to be looking at some esoteric thoughts on Saturday and Sunday. And then Monday, we're going to really focus in on getting ready for game week. we're going to be talking a lot about the Lions. We're going to be talking a lot about the Packers and their preparation for the game against the Lions. We are going to dive deeply. I actively, as much as it burns my soul, I actively listen to people on the beat for the Lions. I listen to YouTube channels about the Lions. Man, those guys are cocky. In any event, I try to soak up as much Bear Lions information as I can going into week 1. I'll be doing that with every opponent throughout the season. So when we're playing Washington week 2, I'm going to be listening to beat writers about the Commanders. I'm going to be watching YouTube channels about the Commanders. I want to bring as much information to you for game time as we can for those matchups. I think that's really important. So on that note, give us a subscribe because we're going to have lots of Packers information for you as well as information about their opponents. And as always, go Pack Go. We'll see you tomorrow with another YouTube video.